The shock wave hit with the force of a collapsing star, shattering the crystalline tranquility of the zenith spire's primary observation tier. Secondary alarms wailed in a dissonant, three-part harmony that usually signaled a critical hull breach, but the structural integrity sensors remained green. This was internal. This was intentional. Exarch Zoraya stumbled, her chroma skin flaring a frantic, jagged amber, the color of a Strati panic. The silver threading in her formal robes caught the flickering emergency lights, making her look like a wounded constellation. Two of her elite guard lay incapacitated near the central dais, their iridescent armor scorched by high-frequency plasma discharge. "Stay down, Your Majesty," a voice commanded. It was a low, gravelly rasp, stripped of the polite deference that usually permeated the spire's corridors. Zoraya looked up, her three pupils narrowing into vertical slits of shock. Kalen Voss, the human consultant who had spent the last 16 weeks perfecting the art of being a decorative piece of furniture, was no longer leaning against the back wall. He was moving with a fluid, predatory grace that defied his reputation for lethargy. In his right hand, he held a kinetic sidearm that definitely had not been cleared by station customs. In his left, a pulse node pulsed with a rhythmic, violet glow. "Master Voss!" Zoraya hissed, her skin shifting toward a bruised purple of indignation, even in the face of death. "What in the great light is this? Where are the reinforcements?" "The reinforcements are currently locked in the mess hall by a corrupted security override, Your Majesty," Kalen replied, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled corridor. "And your High Warden is the one who sent the invite to this little party. Now, if you want to keep breathing, I suggest you stop being a queen for 5 minutes and start being a target that's hard to hit." Another explosion rocked the floor. Kalen didn't flinch. He grabbed the Exarch's arm, a breach of protocol that would have earned him a life sentence an hour ago, and yanked her behind a reinforced pillar made of compressed obsidian. "You speak," she breathed, the amber on her skin fading into a pale, inquisitive silver. 16 weeks of silence. 16 weeks of my mockery. You let me call you a mute gargoyle in front of the entire High Council. "It was a good cover," Kalen said, his focus already back on the tactical display glowing on his wrist. "People don't hide their secrets from the furniture. They certainly don't worry about a human who can't even offer a basic greeting. Now we've got 4 hostiles closing in from the North Transit Tube. They're wearing your guard's colors, but their biometrics are flatline. They're using neural puppets." Zoraya's elongated ears twitched, a sign of intense focus. "Malachor, he always said the human alliance was a ghost in the machine. I didn't realize he meant it literally." "He's not just a nationalist, Zoraya. He's a collaborator," Kalen said, checking his weapons charge. "And right now, you're the only thing standing between him and a total military takeover. We need to move to the sub-level maintenance vents. It's the only route his scanners won't pick up." "The vents? I am the Exarch of the Astrati. I do not crawl through the bowels of this station like a common rodent." Kalen turned to her, his gaze hard and unforgiving. The cynicism she had mistaken for stupidity was actually a shield, a layer of scar tissue over a soul that had seen worlds burn. "Listen to me, and listen good. In about 2 minutes, this room is going to be flooded with neuroparalytic gas. If you stay here to preserve your dignity, you'll be a very dignified corpse. If you come with me, you'll be an alive queen with a very angry human security detail. Make the call." "Copy?" Zoraya looked at the devastation around her, then back at the man who had been the butt of her jokes for 4 months. The silver on her skin solidified into a deep, resonant blue, the color of a resolved sovereign. "Lead the way, Master Voss. But if we survive this, I expect a very detailed report on why Earth's most expensive consultant is also its most effective liar." "Copy that, Your Majesty," Kalen muttered, activating his pulse-ghosting module. "Let's bug out." 12 weeks earlier, the Zenith Spire had been a place of pristine, irritating silence. Kalen Voss had arrived on a shuttle that smelled of recycled air and low-grade ozone, carrying a single duffel bag and a set of credentials that were 70% fabrication. The Soul Convergence had officially sent him as a tactical integration liaison, a title designed to sound impressive while meaning absolutely nothing. In reality, he was a failsafe, a ghost sent to watch a house that everyone claimed wasn't haunted. The first meeting with the High Council had set the tone for his entire residency. The council chamber was a masterpiece of Astrati architecture, a floating disk of translucent quartz suspended over the swirling, chaotic storms of Ouroboros. The gas giant below provided a backdrop of constant, violent movement that contrasted sharply with the glacial stillness of the Astrati elite. Exarch Zoraya had sat upon her throne of light, her skin a shimmering, arrogant gold. At her right hand stood High Warden Malachor, a mountain of a male with skin the color of dried blood and ears that never stopped twitching, cataloging every sound in the room. Master Voss, Zoraya had said, her voice like silk sliding over glass, Earth has sent us many things. Diluted water, inferior alloys, and now it seems they have sent us a statue. The council had rippled with polite, melodic laughter. Kalen had simply stood in his designated corner, hands clasped behind his back, his expression as blank as a fresh datapad. He hadn't bowed. He hadn't spoken. He had just watched. He watched the way Malachor's eyes lingered on the tactical schematics of the station's outer defensive ring. He watched the way the junior ministers deferred to the High Warden whenever the topic of human trade routes came up. He watched the subtle shifts in Zoraya's chroma skin, noting that her gold was often tinged with a faint, sickly green, a sign of physical exhaustion she was desperate to hide. "Tell me," Zoraya had continued, leaning forward, her violet eyes gleaming with malice. "Does your species value silence as a virtue, or is your silence a result of having nothing of value to say? Our records indicate you were a specialist in risk assessment. Perhaps you can assess the risk of me becoming bored with your presence?" Kalen had offered a slow, deliberate nod. Nothing more. "He doesn't even defend himself," Malachor had grunted, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated in Kalen's chest. "It's a waste of credits, Your Majesty. The humans send us their dregs and call it diplomacy. We should send him back on the next freighter." "No," Zoraya had replied, a predatory smile stretching her thin lips. "I find him fascinating in a primitive way. He is like the ancient stone carvings in the deep canyons, useless, immobile, but a reminder of what a lack of evolution looks like. Let him stay. He can be our silent witness to the greatness of the Astrati." For the next 84 days, Kalen Voss became the Spire's most famous nonentity. He ate alone in the crowded cafeteria, ignoring the whispers and the occasional tray, intentionally bumped into his shoulder. He attended every briefing, every gala, and every council session, always positioned in the shadows, always clutching a datapad that appeared to be filled with mundane transcriptions. In reality, the datapad was a terminal for the synaptic echo implanted behind his retinas. Every micro-expression, every nervous tick, and every encrypted transmission sent within 30 meters was being recorded, analyzed, and filed. Night after night, in the sterile safety of his quarters, Kalen would peel back the layers of the Spire's digital life. He found the ghost accounts, millions of credits diverted from the hull maintenance budget into a private sector on the planet below. He found the back doors in the station's sensory array, programmed to go blind for 3 minutes every 48 hours, and he found Malachor. The High Warden was careful, but no one is truly careful when they believe they are being watched by a man who doesn't understand the language. Malachor spoke freely in front of Kalen, discussing the cleansing and the restoration of purity. He used the human consultant as a prop, often gesturing toward Kalen when explaining to his co-conspirators why the alliance was a failure. "Look at him," Malachor would say, his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial blade. "That is the future Earth offers us, a silent, empty shell. We don't need their consultants. We need their absence." Kalen would just stare at the wall, his internal AI processor humming as it decrypted Malachor's latest sub-vocalized command to his sleeper agents. It was exhausting work, maintaining the facade of incompetence. It required a level of ego suppression that would have broken a lesser man. But Kalen Voss wasn't interested in his own dignity. He had lost that years ago, along with his family, on a colony world called New Hope. He had been the lead security officer there too. He had seen the signs of an impending raid, had filed the reports, and had been told to stay silent to avoid unnecessary panic among the colonists. The raiders had arrived at 3 a.m. By dawn, the silence on New Hope was permanent. He wouldn't let the silence happen again. Not here, not on his watch. even if it meant being the most hated man on the zenith spire. "Another day, Master Voss?" Zariah had asked him only yesterday as she passed him in the corridor. She had stopped, her skin a vibrant, mocking pink. "I saw you staring at the gas giant for 2 hours this morning. Did the clouds tell you any human secrets? Or were you just practicing being a rock?" Kaelin had given her a small, respectful bow. "Fascinating," she had sighed, shaking her head. "I honestly wonder if there is anyone actually home inside that skull of yours. It must be so peaceful to have a mind that requires so little fuel." She had walked away, her laughter echoing through the hall. Kaelin had waited until she was out of sight before checking his datapad. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. Malachor had authorized a drill for the following evening. A drill that would bypass the primary defensive grid. The trap was set. Kaelin had walked back to his room, his footsteps heavy but certain. He had made himself a cup of the bitter, metallic coffee the station provided and sat in the dark. He didn't sleep. He checked his sidearm. He calibrated his pulse ghosting module. He waited for the screams to start, because he knew that when the first bomb went off, the Exarch wouldn't be laughing anymore, and the silent man in the corner would be the only one left who knew how to fight back. 24 hours later, as the observation deck exploded, Kaelin Voss took his first breath of the crisis. He felt the familiar weight of adrenaline, the cold clarity that only comes when the world is ending. The mockery was over. The mission had begun. "Master Voss?" Zariah's voice, trembling with the first real fear she had ever felt, pulled him back to the present. They were huddled in the darkness of the maintenance shaft, the sound of the neural puppet's heavy boots thudding on the crystal floor above them. "I'm here, Your Majesty," Kaelin whispered, his eyes glowing with the faint, blue light of his synaptic echo. "And I'm not a statue. I'm the guy who's going to get you your throne back." "Why?" she asked, her skin a muted, confused gray. "Why did you wait so long? Why let me treat you like nothing?" Kaelin looked at her, his silhouette sharp against the flickering emergency light. "Because nothing is the best place to hide a weapon. Now stay quiet. We have 3 more sectors to cross before we reach the backup comms. And Malachor isn't the only one with friends in high places." He moved forward, a shadow among shadows, his silence finally serving its true purpose. The sub-levels of the Zenith Spire were a labyrinth of humming energy and cold, vibrating crystal. Here, far beneath the opulent galleries in the airy council chambers, the station breathed. Thick bundles of fiber-optic nerves pulsed with bioluminescent light, carrying the data that kept the artificial atmosphere breathable and the gravity plates functioning at 98% Earth standard. The air smelled of ozone and the faint metallic tang of ionized cooling fluid. Kaelin Voss moved through the narrow crawl space with a practiced economy of motion. He didn't use a flashlight. His synaptic echo translated the heat signatures and the faint electromagnetic hum of the conduits into a wireframe map overlaid on his vision. To his left, Exarch Zariah was struggling. Her formal robes, woven from silver threads and crushed gemstones, were never designed for a 4-kilometer trek through a maintenance artery. "Check your 6, Kaelin muttered, his voice barely a breath. "The acoustics in these tunnels are a nightmare. Every sound carries for half a mile if the resonant frequency hits the right crystal vein." Zariah paused, leaning against a glowing power junction. Her skin was a dull, exhausted charcoal, the bioluminescence of her Astrati heritage flickering like a dying candle. "Master Voss, I am beginning to suspect that my security minister's coup is the least of my concerns. My lungs feel as though they are filled with powdered glass." "That is the atmospheric scrubbers," Kaelin replied, checking a holographic display on his forearm. "Malachor has turned down the oxygen enrichment in the lower tiers. He is trying to flush out any loyalists who might have ducked into the shadows. He thinks he is clearing the deck of rats." "And am I a rat now, Master Voss? The exarch of the Astrati, hiding in the plumbing of her own palace?" Kaelin turned to look at her. In the dim, shifting light, her violet eyes were wide with a vulnerability she had never allowed him to see in the council chambers. "Right now, Your Majesty, you are a high-value asset in a hot zone. Labels like Exarch don't mean much when the guys with the plasma rifles are doing a room-to-room sweep. You're alive. That makes you the most dangerous thing on this station to Malachor." He reached out and handed her a small metallic cylinder. Drink this. It's a stimulant electrolyte mix from my survival kit. It tastes like battery acid and regret, but it will keep your heart from stalling. Zoraya took the cylinder with trembling fingers. She took a sip and winced, her skin flaring a brief, indignant shade of orange. You were right about the taste. Why do humans insist on making their medicine so aggressive? Because life is aggressive, Kalen said, his eyes returning to the shadows ahead. Stay frosty. We're coming up on a sensor node. They reached a junction where 4 massive conduits converged into a central hub. In the middle of the room, a spherical drone hovered, its single red eye scanning the area with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. It was a seeker swarm unit, one of the many automated sentries Malachor had repurposed for his purge. We are ghosted, right? Zoraya whispered, referring to the pulse ghosting technology Kalen had mentioned earlier. For the next 20 seconds? Yes, Kalen replied, his hand moving to the device on his belt. But the battery on my cloak is redlining. I've been running the echo and the ghosting non-stop since the explosion. We have one shot to get past this node without triggering a station-wide alert. The drone turned, its red light sweeping toward their position. Kalen felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the phantom echo of the New Hope massacre. He remembered the sound of the alarms that hadn't saved anyone. He remembered the silence that followed. He forced his breathing to slow, counting the heartbeats between the drone's rotations. Now, he hissed. They moved together. Kalen kept his body between Zoraya and the drone, his pulse ghosting module emitting a localized field of interference that scrubbed their thermal signatures from the drone's logic core. It was a delicate dance. One wrong step, one heavy breath, and the interference would collapse, leaving them lit up like stars on Malachor's tactical map. They were 5 meters away. 4, 3. The drone paused. Its internal fans spun up to a high-pitched whine. It sensed something, a ripple in the air, a minute fluctuation in the energy field. It began to rotate back toward them, the red eye narrowing as its processing power focused on the anomaly. Zoraya's skin turned a terrified, translucent white. She reached out, her fingers brushing against Kalen's tactical vest. Kalen didn't hesitate. He pulled a small glass marble from his pocket and flicked it toward the far corner of the room. The marble hit a resonant crystal pipe with a sharp, melodic chime. The drone instantly snapped toward the sound, its combat subroutines prioritizing the physical impact over the ghostly ripple behind it. Go, Kalen whispered. They scrambled through the exit hatch just as the drone launched a localized scan of the corner. Kalen slammed the hatch shut and engaged the manual lock, leaning his forehead against the cold metal. His ghosting module let out a final, pathetic spark and died. We're dark now, he said, his voice heavy with fatigue. No more cloaking. From here on out, we play it by ear and hope Malachor's boys are as lazy as they looked in the training drills. Zoraya slid down the wall, her silver robes now stained with grease and dust. She looked at her hands, then at the man standing over her. You didn't have to do that. You could have left me in the gallery. Malachor wanted me, not you. You could have slipped away in the confusion and caught a life pod back to your soul convergence. Kalen looked down at her. The silence between them wasn't the mockery of the council chamber anymore. It was the heavy, uncomfortable weight of two people who had finally stopped pretending. I've spent a long time being the guy who watched things happen, Kalen said quietly. On a colony called New Hope, I was the expert. I saw the signs. I knew the raid was coming. I told my superiors exactly what would happen, down to the minute the first ship would break orbit. They told me to be quiet. They said I was being a paranoid consultant. They said the alliance with the raider clans was too important to risk with an accusation. He paused, his jaw tightening. So I stayed quiet. I followed orders. I watched from my monitor as they burned the colony to the ground. I watched my daughter's school disappear in a cloud of orbital fire because I was too professional to shout. Zoraya's skin shifted to a soft, empathetic blue. I didn't know. Now you do, Kalen said, his voice turning sharp again, a defensive reflex. So no, I'm not leaving you. Not because of diplomacy or credits or Earth's interests. I'm staying because I'm done being the silent observer. If Malachor wants to burn this station, he's going to have to go through the furniture first. He offered her a hand. The exarch of the Astrati looked at the scarred, calloused palm of the human consultant. For the first time in 16 weeks, she didn't see a primitive. She didn't see a statue. She saw a man who was terrified, but who was moving anyway. She took his hand and pulled herself up. Then let us see what the furniture can do, Master Voss. 6 weeks before the first explosion, the Zenith Spire had hosted the Festival of Luminescence. It was a time when the crystalline walls were tuned to vibrate at a frequency that turned the light of Ouroboros into a kaleidoscopic display of impossible colors. For the Astrati, it was a holy day. For Kalen Voss, it was 16 hours of standing in a tuxedo that felt like a straitjacket while watching a room full of potential assassins drink fermented nectar. The grand ballroom was a sea of shimmering skins. Ambassadors from a dozen star systems mingled with the Astrati nobility, their voices a melodic hum that filled the cavernous space. Master Voss! Zoraya's voice had cut through the crowd, sharp and playful. She was surrounded by a gaggle of courtiers, her skin a brilliant, celebratory emerald. Still standing in your corner, I see. Tell me, do you ever move, or do we need to check you for moss? I find the vantage point quite sufficient, Your Majesty, Kalen had replied, his voice neutral. He was wearing a small earpiece that was currently feeding him the encrypted chatter of the station's security detail. High Warden Malachor had approached then, his red skin looking darker under the festival lights. He carried a glass of deep purple liquid that smelled of bitter almonds. The Exarch is right, human. You occupy space with the dedication of a mountain, but even mountains eventually erode. I'll try to stay structural for the duration of the party, Warden, Kalen had said, his eyes scanning Malachor's hands. The Warden's fingers were twitching, a rhythmic, 3-beat tap against his glass. It was a tactical signal, a silent count used by Astrati military officers to coordinate an ambush. Zoraya had laughed, a sound like wind chimes. You see, Malachor? He does have a sense of humor. It is buried under layers of human grit, but it is there. Tell me, Master Voss, if a threat were to walk through those doors right now, what would you do? You have no weapon. You have no guards. You have only your silence. Kalen had looked at the doors. He had already identified the 4 security guards who were standing out of position, their ears angled toward Malachor rather than the exits. He had noted the 2 heavy chandeliers whose support cables had been subtly frayed. He had seen the way the ventilation grates had been modified to allow for rapid gas dispersal. I would observe the threat, Your Majesty, Kalen had said quietly, and then I would act accordingly. Observation is not protection, Malachor had spat, stepping closer. His scent was aggressive, musk and ozone. You are a ghost, Voss, a remnant of a species that shouldn't even be in this sector. You think your quiet notes and your data mining make you relevant, but when the time comes, you will find that silence is just another word for useless. Malachor had turned to Zoraya, his voice softening into a rehearsed devotion. Your Majesty, the Council is waiting for your toast. We should leave the human to his shadows. Kalen had watched them walk away, the emerald light of Zoraya's skin fading into the golden glow of the dais. He didn't feel insulted. He felt a cold, clinical certainty. Malachor wasn't just planning a coup. He was performing it in slow motion, right in front of the Queen, and she was too blinded by her own brilliance to see the shadows stretching across the floor. Back in the present, in the cold, dark maintenance corridor, that emerald light was a distant memory. Kalen checked his wrist display. We are 200 meters from the secondary communication array. If we can get a signal out to the human fleet at the edge of the system, we can end this before Malachor consolidates his power. Will they listen? Zoraya asked. Her blue skin was streaked with the gray of doubt. My people will think I am dead. Malachor will have already broadcast a message claiming the humans attacked the gallery and that he has taken control for the safety of the spire. They'll listen because I'm the one sending the signal, Kalen said, his voice grim. I have a priority override code that only works if the station's primary security has been compromised. The Soul Convergence might be slow to move, but they don't ignore a 000 alert. They reached a heavy circular door marked with the symbol of the Communications Guild. Kalen knelt and began working on the electronic lock, his fingers moving with a frantic, desperate speed. Sit rep, he muttered to himself. Internal systems are scrambled. Malachor has a hard lock on the primary relay. I have to bridge the connection manually. Zoraya stood guard, holding a piece of jagged crystal she had scavenged from a broken conduit. It was a pathetic weapon for an exarch, but she held it with a grim determination. Master Voss. Kalen? Yeah? He didn't look up from the wires. At the festival, when I mocked you, you already knew, didn't you? You knew Malachor was a traitor even then. I had 70% of the picture, Kalen said, snapping two wires together. A spark jumped, illuminating the scars on his knuckles. I didn't have the smoking gun. I didn't have the authorization codes he used to bring in the outside vessels. If I had spoken up then, he would have just killed me and moved his timeline up. I needed to be the useless consultant for a little while longer to get the proof. And you let me call you those things. You let me humiliate you in front of my people to protect the evidence. I've been called worse by better people, Your Majesty, Kalen grunted. The lock clicked. The door hissed open, revealing a room filled with towering servers and glowing data crystals. But right now, I'd really appreciate it if you stopped apologizing and stepped inside. We're about to have company. He was right. At the far end of the corridor, the rhythmic thud of heavy boots echoed off the crystalline walls. The red eyes of three seeker drones cut through the darkness, their beams searching for the heat signatures of the survivors. Get in! Kalen shoved Zoraya into the room and slammed the door. He didn't lock it. He needed the drones to think he was still in the corridor. He pulled two small circular discs from his belt, shock mines, and slapped them onto the walls beside the doorframe. He slipped into the room just as the first drone reached the entrance. Kalen scrambled to the central console, his hands flying across the interface. He wasn't looking at the screens. He was listening to the sound of the drones outside. The first mine detonated with a high-pitched whine of static, followed by the clatter of a drone hitting the floor. The second mine followed a heartbeat later. One left, Kalen muttered. The door burst open. The final drone hovered in the doorway, its red eye scanning the room. It found Zoraya, who was crouched behind a server rack. The drone's weapon systems began to hum, the air around it shimmering with the heat of a charging plasma bolt. Hey, you scrap heap, Kalen yelled. The drone turned toward him. Kalen wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a heavy power cell he had ripped from the console. He threw it with all his strength. The cell struck the drone's sensor array, shattering the red lens. The drone spun wildly, firing a stray plasma bolt that melted a hole in the ceiling before Kalen tackled it to the ground and drove his combat knife into its processor core. The room went silent, save for the frantic panting of the two survivors. You. Zoraya stepped out from behind the rack, her skin a swirling, chaotic mix of silver and violet. You fought a combat drone with a battery and a knife. I'm a consultant, Your Majesty, Kalen panted, wiping grease from his face. We're taught to use whatever resources are available in the budget. He turned back to the console and began typing. The screen flickered to life, showing a map of the surrounding star system. He entered a string of 36 characters, his fingers blurring against the keys. 000 alert transmitted, he said, a small, weary smile touching his lips. The cavalry is coming. It will take them 4 hours to reach the spire. We just have to stay alive until then. Zoraya walked over to the viewport. From this height, Ouroboros looked like a vast, swirling sea of fire. The station's running lights reflected off the crystalline surface, creating a halo of light in the darkness of the void. 4 hours, she whispered. Malachor will have realized we are here by now. He will send everything he has to this room. Then we make sure he pays for every meter, Kalen said. He picked up his kinetic sidearm and checked the magazine. 12 rounds left. Not enough for a war, but enough to make a statement. He looked at Zoraya. Her skin was settling into a deep, resonant gold. Not the arrogant gold of the council chamber, but a solid, defiant color. The color of a leader who had found her spine in the dark. Your Majesty, he said, his voice soft. I'm sorry about the tuxedo comments. It actually was a very nice tux. Zoraya looked at him, and for the first time, she smiled, a genuine, human-like expression of warmth. It was a terrible tuxedo, Kalen. It made you look like a box. But I suppose a box is a very useful thing when you need to hide a hero inside. She reached out and squeezed his shoulder. Her hand was cold, but her grip was firm. We are not silent anymore, Master Voss. Let them come. Let them see what happens when the furniture fights back. Outside, the first of Malakor's elite shock troops began to burn through the door, the sparks of their torches falling like dying stars in the gloom of the zenith spire. Kalen took his position by the door, his weapon ready, his eyes fixed on the encroaching fire. He wasn't a statue. He wasn't a ghost. He was the man who had stopped watching. In the silence of the room, he felt the fear, the cold, sharp edge of it, but he didn't let it stop him. He remembered the schools of New Hope. He remembered the face of his daughter, and he realized that courage wasn't about the absence of that fear. It was about standing in the doorway of a communications room on a dying space station and choosing to stay, even when every instinct told him to run. "Get behind the console, Zariah," he commanded. "This is going to get loud." "Copy that," she replied, her voice steady and clear. The door began to buckle. The silence was finally, mercifully, over. The door to the communication hub did not just open. It groaned under the thermal stress of a heavy-duty plasma torch, the crystalline alloy shrieking as it was forced to surrender its structural integrity. Kalen Voss stood 5 paces back, his kinetic sidearm leveled at the glowing orange seam. Beside him, Exarch Zariah held her makeshift crystal dagger with a white-knuckled grip that made her skin pulse a rhythmic, terrified violet. "Listen to me, Z," Kalen said, using the informal shorthand for the first time without even realizing it. "When that door pops, they are going to throw a flashbang. Do not look at the light. Close your eyes and count to 3. If you see a shadow move, you drop low." "Copy?" Zariah's elongated ears twitched in the darkness. "I copy, Master Voss. But what if there are more than 2? "Then things get messy," Kalen muttered, his thumb clicking the safety off. "But these guys are neural puppets. They are fast, but they ain't smart. They follow the script. We just have to change the ending." The center of the door suddenly turned a blinding, translucent white. With a sound like a thunderclap, the melted crystal gave way, spraying droplets of molten glass across the floor. A small metallic canister skittered through the opening, hissing as it bounced. "Eyes!" Kalen roared. He dove to the left, pulling Zariah down with him. The world dissolved into a cacophony of white light and a high-pitched scream of sonic interference. Even with his eyes clamped shut, Kalen felt the pressure wave rattle his teeth. His synaptic echo flared, struggling to recalibrate against the sensory overload. The AI in his head hissed a warning. Optical sensors at 40%. Recalibrating. He didn't wait for his vision to return. He fired 3 rounds into the gap where the door had been. The heavy kinetic slugs thudded into something solid, followed by a grunt and the clatter of a heavy rifle hitting the deck. "One down," Kalen shouted, rolling behind a server rack. A spray of blue plasma bolts hissed over his head, melting the top of the rack into a puddle of slag. The air became a toxic soup of burnt electronics and ozone. Kalen squinted through the haze. He could see 2 figures now, silhouettes outlined by the emerald light of the hallway. They moved with a synchronized, jerky precision that confirmed their status as puppets. Zariah was huddled against the wall, her skin a translucent gray. She looked paralyzed, her eyes wide as she watched the plasma fire tear into her sanctuary. This was the queen who had mocked his silence, the woman who had stood atop a throne and judged the universe from a distance. Now the universe was pushing back, and the distance had vanished. "Hustle up, Your Majesty," Kalen barked, reaching out to grab the collar of her robe. "We can't stay in this kill box." A bolt of plasma struck the floor inches from his boot, sending a spray of heat that scorched his calf. Kalen winced, his teeth grinding together as the pain flared. He shoved Zariah toward a small ventilation hatch near the ceiling, a hidden exit he had mapped out weeks ago during his silent midnight walks. "Get in there. It leads to the gravity well service tubes." "But you're hurt," she whispered, her skin flaring a panicked amber as she saw the blackened fabric of his trousers. "It's just a singe. Move!" Kalen turned back to the door, firing his last 9 rounds in a controlled burst. He saw the second puppet buckle, its iridescent armor shattered by the high-velocity impacts. But behind it, more shadows were gathering. Malachor was sending a full squad. Kalen hoisted himself up into the hatch after Zariah, his muscles screaming from the exertion. He kicked the metal grate shut just as a hail of plasma fire filled the room below. The heat was intense, the metal beneath him vibrating with the energy of the attack. They scrambled through the narrow, dark tube, the sound of their frantic breathing the only noise in the cramped space. The service tube was barely a meter wide, filled with the hum of the station's artificial gravity generators. "Master Voss," Zoraya panted, her voice echoing in the confined space. "You are bleeding." "I've bled for less," Kalen replied, though the sweat on his brow told a different story. The pain was a dull throb now, a familiar companion. On New Hope, he had carried a wounded child for 3 kilometers while his shoulder was shattered. This was nothing, or at least that was the lie he told himself to keep his legs moving. They reached a vertical shaft where a series of glowing blue rings indicated a gravity lift. Normally, these were used for maintenance drones, but today they were their only hope of reaching the lower sanctuary. "We jump on 3, Kalen said, checking the charge on his kinetic sidearm. It was empty. He tossed it aside with a clatter. "From here on out, we're going hand to hand or using the environment." "Master Voss, why do you keep doing this?" Zoraya asked, her hand resting on the edge of the blue ring. Her skin was a steady, quiet blue now. "You have no reason to love my people. You have no reason to save me." Kalen looked at her. In the dim light of the gravity well, he looked older than his 38 years. The cynicism was gone, replaced by a raw, jagged honesty. "Because I sat in a chair once and watched a world die," he said quietly, "and I learned that the only thing worse than the fear of acting is the silence that comes after you don't. I don't give a damn about the credits or the alliance right now, Zoraya. I just don't want to hear that silence again." He jumped. The gravity field caught them, a sickening tug at the gut that felt like being pulled through a straw. They plummeted down the shaft, the blue rings blurring into a single line of light. Above them, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the deep, rhythmic thrum of the spire's heart. They hit the bottom with a jarring thud, the dampening field barely absorbing the impact. Kalen rolled to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. They were in the deep core, a region of the station where the ancient Astrudi technology was most concentrated. The walls here were not polished crystal, but raw, unhewn stone that hummed with a primal energy. "This is the Chamber of Resonances," Zoraya whispered, her skin turning a respectful, glowing silver. "My ancestors carved this tram before the first human had even discovered fire." "Slick place for a hideout," Kalen said, limping toward a stone dais in the center of the room. "But can we lock the door?" "There are no doors here, Master Voss. Only intent. If Malakor's heart is as twisted as his actions, he will not be able to find this place. The resonance will reject him." Kalen grunted skeptically. "I'll put my faith in the resonance, but I'm still going to keep an eye on the sensors." He slumped against the dais, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede. His leg was a mess of blistered skin and charred fabric. He pulled a small med kit from his belt and began to apply a cooling gel, his movements slow and mechanical. Zoraya watched him, her violet eyes tracking every flinch. She had seen her warriors die in glorious battle, their skins turning a brilliant gold as they expired. She had never seen a man quietly patch himself up in the dark, his dignity found not in his status, but in his refusal to break. "Master Voss," she began, her voice soft, "I believe I have been a fool." "Only one?" Kalen asked, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. "You're doing better than most humans." "I thought your silence was a sign of weakness," she continued, ignoring his joke. "I thought that because you did not sing with your words, you had no music in your soul. I see now that your silence was the foundation. You were the only one who was actually listening to the storm." Kalen paused, the gel applicator hovering over his wound. "I wasn't just listening to the storm, Zoraya. I was waiting for it. I've spent 20 weeks being the guy nobody notices. It's a lonely place to be, but it gives you a very clear view of the cracks in the wall." He finished bandaging his leg and looked up at her. "Malachor didn't just wake up one day and decide to be a traitor. He's been building this for years. He's been feeding on the resentment of your people, the fear that humanity is going to dilute your culture. He's using your pride as a weapon against you. And I gave him the ammunition," she said, her skin turning a dark, mournful purple. Every time I mocked you, every time I spoke of human inferiority, I was echoing his poison. I thought I was being a strong leader. I was just being his loud golden puppet. Kalen reached out and placed a hand on the stone floor. The resonance Zoraya had mentioned was real. He could feel it vibrating in his bones, a deep, comforting frequency. Courage isn't about being the loudest person in the room, Z, he said. It's about being the one who stays when everyone else is running. You're still here. That's a start. Suddenly, a holographic projection flared to life in the center of the room. It was a distorted, grainy image, but the red skin and the cold eyes were unmistakable. High Warden Malachor. He was standing in the council chamber, his hand resting on the throne of light. Behind him, 3 human delegates were being held at gunpoint by neural puppets. Among them was Ambassador Halloway, the woman who had sent Kalen on this mission. People of the Zenith Spire, Malachor's voice boomed, amplified by the station's internal broadcast system. Our exarch has fled. She has abandoned us in our hour of need, choosing to hide in the shadows with her human pet. She has proven that she is unfit to lead the Astrati. Kalen felt a cold fury settle in his stomach. He's going to kill them, he whispered. The human vessel is approaching our borders, Malachor continued, gesturing to a tactical display. They claim to be a rescue mission. We know the truth. They are an invasion force invited by Zoraya to secure her failing reign. For the safety of our species, I am taking emergency control of the Spire. The human delegates will be executed at midnight to show our resolve. Zoraya stood up, her skin flaring a brilliant, angry violet. He is lying. The rescue ship is not an invasion. It is a hospital ship. He knows that, Kalen said, his voice dangerously low. He's baiting them. He wants the humans to fire first so he can justify a full-scale war. He's playing for keeps, Z. Midnight, Zoraya whispered, her ears pinning back against her head. That is only 2 hours from now. Kalen looked at the bandage on his leg, then at the empty hallway leading back to the gravity well. He felt the weight of new hope on his shoulders, the memory of the silence that had followed the orbital fire. Well, he said, standing up with a grimace of pain, it looks like the furniture is going to have to make a move. The chamber of resonances felt like a tomb, the ancient stone walls absorbing the echoes of Malachor's broadcast. Kalen Voss was already moving, his fingers tapping rapidly against his wrist-mounted console. The synaptic echo was running at 90% capacity, the heat from the processor behind his eye making his vision blur with a reddish tint. We need a plan that doesn't involve us getting fragged in the first 5 seconds, Kalen muttered. His voice was clipped, the professional security consultant overriding the wounded man. How can we stop him? Zoraya asked. She was pacing the stone floor, her skin a chaotic swirl of silver and deep blue. He has the entire security force. He has the drones. He has the throne. He doesn't have the truth, Kalen said, and he doesn't have this. He tapped a sequence into his console, and a small, flickering hologram appeared in the air between them. It wasn't a tactical map or a technical schematic. It was a video of a young girl, perhaps 7 years old, laughing as she tried to catch a mechanical butterfly in a sun-drenched garden. Zoraya stopped pacing. Who is this? My daughter Maya, Kalen said, his voice softening just for a second before hardening again. This was taken on New Hope, 2 days before the raid. I keep it in a secure partition of my echo. It's the only thing I have left of that world. The exarch stepped closer, her skin turning a soft, inquisitive gold. She is beautiful. But why show me this now? Because Malachor thinks humans are empty shells, Kalen said, his eyes fixed on the image of his daughter. He thinks our silence means we have nothing to lose. He thinks he can kill those delegates and we'll just walk away or fire back blindly. He doesn't understand that our silence is where we keep our most precious things. He closed the hologram and looked at Zoraya. We're not going to fight his army. We're going to fight his narrative. If we can broadcast the truth about the rescue ship, the actual logs, the medical manifests, to the entire Spire, his support will evaporate. The Astrati are proud, but they aren't murderers. They won't support an execution based on a lie. But the communication array is guarded, Zoraya pointed out. You saw the squad he sent. I saw them, Kalen agreed, and I saw that they were puppets. That means Malachor is spread thin. He's using neural links to control the guards because he doesn't trust his own people to pull the trigger on a lie. If we can take out the central neural hub, the puppets will go dead. And without his puppets, Malachor is just a man with a loud voice and a stolen throne. Where is the hub? The secondary maintenance node, 3 levels up. It's right above the gravity well we just came down. Zariah looked at the vertical shaft, then at Kalen's bandaged leg. You cannot climb that, Master Voss. I'm not climbing, Kalen said, reaching into his med kit and pulling out a small, high-pressure injector. He slammed it into his thigh. The stimulant cocktail hit his system like a lightning bolt, his pupils dilating and his heart rate doubling in a matter of seconds. Oh, that's some heavy lifting, he gasped, his skin flushing with heat. I'm going to feel that in the morning, if there is a morning. We move now, Z. We have 90 minutes. They climb back into the gravity well, Kalen using the manual override to reverse the flow. It was a jerky, unstable ascent, the blue rings flickering as the station's power grid began to buckle under Malachor's mismanagement. Kalen could feel the station vibrating, a low-frequency hum that suggested the life support systems were being pushed beyond their limits. He's taxing the core, Zariah whispered as they neared the upper level. He's drawing too much power for his broadcasts and his security fields. He's going to damage the spire. He doesn't care, Kalen said. To him, the station is just a platform. He'd burn it to the ground if it meant he could stand on the ashes. They reached the maintenance node, a cramped room filled with pulsing neural transmitters. 2 guards stood at the entrance, their eyes vacant and staring. They were puppets, their nervous systems hijacked by the silver collars around their necks. Don't kill them, Zariah whispered, her skin turning a pained gray. They are my people. They have no choice. Kalen nodded. I'll go for the collars. You keep their attention. Zariah stepped into the light, her skin flaring a brilliant, commanding gold. Warriors of the Astrati, she cried, her voice echoing through the corridor. Your exarch has returned. Lay down your arms and honor the light. The puppets didn't respond with words. They raised their plasma rifles, their movements mechanical and cold. But the momentary hesitation, the split second it took for Malachor to process her presence and issue a command, was all Kalen needed. He moved like a shadow, his speed enhanced by the stimulants. He lunged at the first guard, his hand closing around the silver collar. With a sharp twist and a burst of static, the collar snapped. The guard collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. Kalen didn't stop. He dove under the second guard's rifle, his shoulder slamming into the puppet's chest. He reached up, his fingers digging into the neural link. The guard fired a wild shot that scorched the ceiling before the collar hissed and died. Both guards were alive, but unconscious. Kalen leaned against the neural hub, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Slick move, Master Voss, Zariah said, her skin settling into a proud silver. Save the praise for later, Kalen panted. Help me with this console. We need to reroute the neural buffer to the broadcast relay. As they worked, the air in the room grew colder. The lights flickered and dimmed. Kalen could hear the distant sound of footsteps, real footsteps this time. Malachor had realized the hub was compromised. Master Voss, Zariah said, her skin turning a worried violet. I think we have reached the turning point. Kalen didn't look up. He was staring at the data flowing across his screen. The rescue ship, the USS Solstice, was only 30 minutes from the border. He could see its manifest. Surgical drones, oxygen tanks, 3,000 liters of synthetic blood. It was a mercy mission, pure and simple. I've got it, Kalen whispered. I'm bridging the gap. Suddenly, the monitors in the room shifted. Malachor's face appeared again, but this time it wasn't a broadcast. He was looking directly at them through the room's internal camera. Master Voss, the warden said, his voice surprisingly calm. You are a persistent insect. I should have crushed you weeks ago. You should have done a lot of things, Malachor, Kalen said, his fingers never leaving the keys, like learning how to lead without using leashes. Malachor laughed, a cold, hollow sound. And what will your truth achieve? The Astrati are already afraid. They have already seen the human ships. Fear is a much stronger resonance than truth, Voss. Your silence didn't protect you, and your words won't save you. He gestured to someone off camera. I have grown tired of this game. Execute the delegates now. No! Zoraya screamed, lunging toward the screen. Wait, Kaelin hissed, grabbing her arm. Look! On the tactical display, a new signal appeared. It was small, fast, and coming from the direction of the human fleet. But it wasn't a ship. It was a high-frequency data burst, a direct transmission from the Solstice to the Spire's public network. Malakor's expression changed. His skin turned a frantic, jagged amber. What is this? Block it! Too late, Kaelin said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. That's my backup. I told the Solstice that if they didn't hear from me by 2300 hours, they were to broadcast the medical logs on every open channel in the sector. They aren't just sending it to the Spire, Malakor. They're sending it to every Astridi colony in the system. The broadcast hit the room's speakers. It wasn't a speech. It was the sound of human doctors talking to their patients, the clatter of medical equipment, the quiet, mundane sounds of a species trying to save lives. It was the sound of the Alliance. Not the political alliance, but the human one. Zoraya looked at the screen, her skin flaring a brilliant, hopeful gold. They are listening. Across the station, the reaction was immediate. The thud of footsteps in the corridor stopped. The humming of the neural hub shifted as the power draw from the puppets dropped. Malakor's guards were hesitating. The truth was resonating, clashing with the fear he had manufactured. Malakor snarled, his skin turning a dark, bruised purple. It doesn't matter. I still have the throne. I still have the delegates. Kaelin Voss stood up, his hand resting on the neural hub. His leg was screaming in pain. His vision was tunneling from the stimulants, and he had no weapon left but his voice. You have nothing, Malakor, Kaelin said, his voice echoing through the comm link to the council chamber. You think our silence was a sign of your greatness? But it was just the silence of us waiting for you to prove who you really were. You've shown the universe, and now the universe is going to answer. Kaelin slammed his hand down on the override switch. The neural hub exploded in a shower of blue sparks. The feedback loop traveled through the station's network, snapping the collars of every puppet in the spire. In the council chamber, the guards slumped to the floor, their eyes clearing as the neural link was severed. Ambassador Halloway and the other delegates were free, but the cost was immediate. The explosion had shattered the crystalline console, and a jagged shard of alloy had sliced deep into Kaelin's side. He fell back against the wall, his breath coming in wet, ragged gasps. Kaelin! Zoraya dove to his side, her hands glowing with a soft, healing silver. Stay with me, Master Voss. I'm good, Z, Kaelin panted, though the blood pooling on the floor said otherwise. Did we stop the silence? Yes, she whispered, her skin turning a mournful, beautiful blue. The spire is singing again. Outside, the first of Malakor's loyalists began to break down the door, but this time they weren't met with a silent human in a corner. They were met with the exarch of the Astradi, standing over a fallen hero, her skin a brilliant, defiant gold that could be seen from the stars. Kaelin Voss closed his eyes, the sound of Maya's laughter echoing in his mind. He was tired. He was broken. But for the first time in 10 years, the silence was finally gone. He had acted. He had spoken. And in the dark of the Zenith Spire, he had finally found his own music. Courage, he realized as the world began to fade, wasn't the absence of fear. It was the choice to be the only thing standing in the way of a nightmare, even when you knew you might not survive the dawn. We're going to be okay, Z, he muttered, his voice trailing off. Just watch the 6. Copy that, Master Voss, Zoraya replied, her voice steady and true. Copy that. The air in the secondary maintenance node had turned thick and heavy, tasting of scorched copper in the ozone of failing circuits. Kaelin Voss slumped against the vibrating wall, his hand pressed firmly against the jagged wound in his side. Blood, dark and visceral, leaked through his fingers, staining the silver-gray fabric of his tactical vest. Every breath was a jagged glass shards in his lungs, a reminder of the price of his sudden, loud defiance. Master Voss, you are fading, Exarch Zoraya whispered. Her skin was a frantic, swirling nebula of indigo and bruised violet. She knelt beside him, her long, elegant fingers glowing with a soft, bioluminescent heat as she tried to stem the flow. The resonance, I can feel it flickering within you. It is becoming quiet. Kalen offered a ghost of a smile, though it looked more like a grimace. Quiet is my specialty, Z. I've spent 16 weeks practicing for this. This is not the time for your human sarcasm. Zoraya's voice cracked, a rare fracture in her royal composure. You have shattered the neural hub. You have exposed the lie. But if you die here in this dark hole, who will testify to the truth of what we have done? Who will tell my people that their exarch was saved by a man she treated like a common stone? Tell them yourself, Kalen panted, his vision beginning to tunnel. The stimulant cocktail was wearing off, leaving him with the crushing debt of physical trauma. Tell them that the silence they hated was actually me listening for the sound of their own house burning down. Outside the reinforced door, the heavy rhythmic thuds of Malakor's loyalists, those who followed him not by neural link, but by choice, echoed through the crystalline hallway. They weren't puppets anymore. They were angry, desperate soldiers who knew their world was slipping through their fingers. They will be through that door in less than 5 minutes, Zoraya said, her skin settling into a hard, cold silver. She stood up, her stature returning to that of the sovereign who ruled the Zenith Spire. She looked at the 2 unconscious guards Kalen had freed from their collars. They are still breathing. Malakor would have left them as husks. You saved them, Kalen. Why? In a war, you are supposed to eliminate the enemy. Because they aren't the enemy, Z, Kalen said, his voice a low rasp. They're just people who got caught in the crossfire of a bad idea. On New Hope, I saw what happens when you stop seeing people and start seeing targets. Once you cross that line, there's no coming back. You just become another monster in the dark. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Zoraya flinch. Courage isn't about being the one who kills the most. It's about being the one who refuses to let the fear turn them into something they hate. Zoraya looked at the door, then back at the man bleeding out on her floor. She reached down and picked up the kinetic sidearm Kalen had discarded earlier. It was empty, a useless hunk of alloy, but she held it like a scepter. I spent my life believing that my skin was my shield, she said, her voice dropping to a resonant hum that vibrated the very air. I thought that because I was born to the gold, I was immune to the rot. But the rot was inside me, Kalen. It was the pride that kept me from seeing the man standing right in front of me. She turned to the console, her fingers moving with a new frantic purpose. Malakor has blocked the primary lifts, but the resonance tuning in this sector is ancient. If I can synchronize my own bioluminescence with the station's core, I can trigger a localized gravitational inversion. A what? Kalen asked, blinking through the haze of blood loss. An elevator ride, Master Voss. A very fast, very dangerous one. The door behind them buckled inward, a spiderweb of cracks appearing in the translucent crystal. The soldiers on the other side were using a heavy-duty ram. One more hit and the room would be flooded with Malakor's elite. Zoraya closed her eyes. Her skin began to glow with an intensity that Kalen had never seen. A brilliant, blinding white that transcended the colors of the Astrati spectrum. It wasn't the gold of royalty or the silver of concentration. It was the pure, raw light of a soul that had finally shed its armor. Hang on to me, Kalen, she commanded. He reached out, his hand trembling as it found the fabric of her robes. The world suddenly lurched. The floor beneath them didn't just move. It dissolved into a shimmering field of pure energy. Kalen felt the weightless, sickening pull of the gravity well, but this time it wasn't controlled. It was a chaotic, surging force that tore them away from the maintenance node just as the door shattered. They were flying through the guts of the station, a blur of wires, pipes, and ancient stone. Kalen squeezed his eyes shut, his mind flashing back to the garden on New Hope, to Maya's laughter, to the silence of the void. He felt Zoraya's grip on his arm, a solid, unwavering anchor in the storm of light. He realized then that he had been wrong about one thing. He had thought that by staying silent, he was protecting himself from the pain of his past. He thought that if he didn't participate, he couldn't fail again. But the silence had been his own prison. By refusing to speak, he had refused to live. The light faded, and they slammed into a hard, polished surface. Kalen groaned, the impact sending a fresh wave of agony through his side. He opened his eyes and saw the familiar, soaring arches of the High Council chamber. They were at the very heart of the spire, just meters away from the throne of light. But they weren't alone. High Warden Malachor was there, standing on the dais. He was surrounded by a dozen soldiers, their rifles leveled at the three human delegates who were kneeling on the floor. Ambassador Holloway looked up, her face bruised but her eyes sharp. "Voss," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Malachor turned, his skin a dark, bruised purple of absolute fury. "So, the statue has finally found its legs, and our exarch has decided to play in the dirt." He stepped off the dais, his boots clicking on the crystal floor. "You are too late, Zariah. The broadcast has already reached the colonies. The humans are seen as the aggressors. Your little medical logs are being dismissed as deepfake propaganda. My people want blood, and I am going to give it to them." Zariah stood up, her robes torn, her skin still glowing with that strange white light. "The only blood that will be spilled today is yours, Malachor. Not because of your treason, but because of your cowardice. You feared the Alliance because you feared your own obsolescence. You couldn't lead in a world of peace, so you tried to build a throne of bones." Malachor laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I am saving our species. We were becoming soft, trading our heritage for human trinkets. Look at your hero, Zariah. Look at this broken, silent animal. This is what you chose over your own kind?" Kalen pulled himself up, using a crystalline pillar for support. His legs felt like lead, and the world was spinning in slow, nauseating circles. He looked at Malachor, then at the soldiers. He saw the hesitation in their eyes. They had heard the medical logs. They had seen the neural puppets fall. The fear Malachor had built was strong, but the doubt was stronger. "Malachor," Kalen said, his voice a steady, cold rasp that filled the cavernous room. "You talk a lot about silence. You think it's a sign of weakness. But silence is just the space where you decide what kind of man you're going to be." He took a staggering step forward, away from the pillar. "I've been silent for 10 years. I've been hiding in the shadows because I was afraid that if I spoke up, I'd lose everything again. But I'm done hiding." He looked at the soldiers, meeting their eyes one by one. "You guys don't have to do this. You aren't puppets anymore. You can see the truth. That ship out there, it's not an invasion. It's a hand held out in the dark. You can either slap it away and spend the rest of your lives wondering when the next fire will start, or you can take it and finally go home." Malachor snarled, his hand moving to the hilt of his blade. "Silence him!" The soldiers didn't move. One of them, a young female with skin the color of a pale dawn, lowered her rifle. "We heard the logs, Warden. We heard the human doctors. They were calling out for our wounded." Malachor's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He drew his blade, a shimmering arc of plasma-edged steel. "If you won't do your duty, then I will." He lunged toward Kalen, the blade whistling through the air. Kalen didn't have a weapon. He didn't have the strength to dodge. He simply stood his ground, his eyes fixed on Malachor. He wasn't a statue. He wasn't a ghost. He was a man who had finally found something worth dying for. But the blade never reached him. Zariah moved with a speed that defied the physical laws of the spire. She intercepted Malachor, her own skin flaring with a blinding intensity. She didn't use a weapon. She used the resonance. She placed her hands on Malachor's chest, and a pulse of pure white energy rippled through the room. Malachor was thrown back, his blade clattering across the floor. He hit the dais with a sickening thud and lay still, his skin fading into a dull, lifeless gray. The room went silent, a true, profound silence. Zariah stood over him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her white light faded, returning to the golden hue of the exarch. She looked at her soldiers, then at the human delegates. "Take him to the detention levels," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that no one dared to question. "And someone get a medical team to the council chamber immediately. Our consultant has earned his rest." Kalen felt his knees give out. He slumped to the floor, the cold crystal feeling like a warm bed. He saw Zariah kneeling beside him again, her face a blur of gold and tears. "You stayed," she whispered. Even when you knew he would kill you, you didn't stay silent. Kalen felt a hand on his shoulder. Ambassador Holloway, and then another, Zoraya. He wasn't alone in the corner anymore. I had to check the 6Z, he murmured, his eyes drifting shut. You did, Master Voss. You did. The medical wing of the Zenith Spire was a place of soft blue light and the rhythmic hum of healing mists. It had been 4 days since the confrontation in the council chamber, and the station was still vibrating with the aftershocks of Malakor's failed coup. The air no longer smelled of ozone and burnt electronics. It smelled of the sterile, floral scent of Astrati medicine. Kalen Voss lay in a suspension bed, his side wrapped in layers of bioactive bandages. He looked thinner, the lines around his eyes deeper, but the haunted look that had defined him for a decade was gone. He was staring out the viewport at the gas giant Ouroboros, watching the storm clouds shift from orange to a deep, bruised purple. It's a hell of a view when people aren't shooting at you, a voice said. Kalen turned his head slowly. Ambassador Holloway was standing in the doorway, a tray of real human coffee in her hands. She looked tired, but there was a spark of triumph in her eyes. Ambassador, Kalen said, his voice still a bit rough. How's the sit-rep? The sit-rep is complicated but positive, she said, pulling up a chair and handing him a cup. Malakor is in deep freeze awaiting trial. His co-conspirators are being rounded up across the colonies. The Astrati High Council is in emergency session, but the medical ship, the Solstice, has already docked. They've treated over 500 Astrati citizens for the oxygen deprivation Malakor caused in the lower tiers. She took a sip of her coffee and looked at him seriously. You did good, Voss. Better than good. The reports I'm getting from Zoraya, she's calling you the shield of the Zenith. Earth is going to have a hard time calling you an ineffective consultant after this. Kalen grunted, the motion sending a dull throb through his side. I was just doing my job, Holloway. I observed, I assessed, I acted. You did a lot more than that. You broke every protocol in the book. You stayed behind when you could have bugged out. You risked a diplomatic incident to save a queen who had been mocking you for months. Why? Kalen looked back at the planet. Because I was tired of being the only one who survived, he said quietly. I spent 10 years thinking that if I just kept my head down and my mouth shut, I wouldn't have to feel the weight of the people I couldn't save. But silence doesn't make the weight go away. It just makes it heavier. He looked at Holloway. On New Hope, I followed the rules. I stayed silent because my superiors told me to, and everybody died. This time, I decided to be the loud, messy human who didn't know his place, and it worked. Holloway nodded, a soft smile on her face. Sometimes the rules are just walls we build because we're afraid of the wind. I'm glad you stepped outside, Kalen. She stood up to leave. Rest up. Zoraya is coming to see you in an hour. She says she has some ceremonial nonsense she needs to discuss with you. Her words, not mine. I think she's been spending too much time around you. Copy that, Kalen said. An hour later, the door hissed open and Exarch Zoraya entered. She wasn't wearing her formal robes. She was dressed in a simple, silver tunic, her skin a calm, steady gold. Her elongated ears were still decorated with the crystalline gems of her station, but her presence felt different, less like a goddess and more like a woman who had seen the bottom of her own soul. Master Voss, she said, her voice a warm, resonant hum. You look less like a corpse today. That is an improvement. I aim to please your majesty, Kalen said, trying to sit up. She moved to his side and gently pushed him back down. Do not exert yourself. The healing mists still have much work to do on that stubborn human body of yours. She sat on the edge of the bed, her skin flaring a brief, playful pink. I have been informed that the human fleet is preparing to depart now that the crisis has stabilized. Ambassador Holloway is eager to get you back to Earth for a proper hero's welcome, as she calls it. Kalen made a face. A hero's welcome sounds like a lot of loud speeches and bad suits. I think I'll pass. Zoraya laughed, the sound filling the room like a light. I thought you might say that, which is why I have a counter-proposal. She looked at him, her violet eyes serious. The High Council has decided that we need a permanent human liaison on the Zenith Spire. Not a consultant who hides in the shadows, but a partner. Someone who knows how to listen to the things we are too proud to hear. Someone who isn't afraid to be the furniture when the room is full of liars. Kaylin looked at her, surprised. You're asking me to stay? I am asking you to continue our education, Kaylin. I have learned more from your 16 weeks of silence and your 1 hour of shouting than I did in a century of royal tutoring. I don't want to go back to the way things were. I don't want to be the queen of a gilded cage. She reached out and placed her hand on his. Her skin was warm, the bioluminescence a soft, comforting pulse. The alliance is fragile, Kaylin. Malakor's poison is still in the air. We need people who know how to find the cracks before the wall falls. We need you. Kaylin looked at her hand, then at the viewport. He thought about Earth, the crowded cities, the bureaucracy, the noise. And then he thought about the zenith spire, the cold beauty, the ancient resonance, and the woman who had finally learned to see him. He thought about Maya. He realized that for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't looking back at what he had lost. He was looking forward at what he could build. Will I have to wear the tuxedo again? He asked. Zoraya's skin flared a mischievous emerald. Only on the high holy days. The rest of the time, you can wear whatever gritty human rags you prefer. I'll have to think about it, Kaylin said, his voice soft. It's a big commitment, and your coffee is still terrible. We will work on the coffee, she promised. She stood up and walked to the door, pausing before she left. One more thing, Master Voss. Yeah? Your silence. It wasn't useless. It gave me the space to find my own voice. Thank you for that. She disappeared into the corridor, leaving Kaylin alone with the view of Ouroboros. He took a sip of the human coffee Holloway had left. It was cold now, but it still tasted better than anything the station had to offer. He felt the weight of the decision, the fear of starting over, the shadow of the past, but he didn't feel the silence. He reached for his datapad and began to type. He wasn't writing a report or a transcript. He was writing a message to the Soul Convergence. Status update, he wrote. Initial observation complete. Cultural integration ongoing. Found something worth securing. Requesting permission to extend assignment indefinitely. He hit send. Outside, the stars were burning bright in the dark of the void. Kaylin Voss, the man who had been a statue, the man who had been a ghost, watched them with the quiet, steady gaze of someone who had finally come home. He had learned that courage wasn't a single, loud moment of glory. It was the long, slow work of staying present when every part of you wanted to disappear. It was the choice to speak when the world was screaming for you to stay quiet. And it was the realization that even in the most silent heart, there is always a song waiting to be heard. He closed his eyes and drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. The hum of the zenith spire, a lullaby in the dark. The dawn was coming, and for the first time, Kaylin Voss was ready to meet it. The zenith spire was no longer a cathedral of pristine, arrogant silence. It was a construction site. The air, once filtered to a level of sterile perfection that made Kaylin's throat itch, now carried the heavy, honest scent of molten alloy, ozone-scented welding torches, and the frantic, chaotic hum of 1,000 voices working in unison. The gilded cage, as Zoraya had called it, had been cracked open, and the light pouring in was messy, unfiltered, and real. Kaylin Voss sat on a crate of industrial-grade insulation in the middle of the main observation deck. His side still ached, a deep, rhythmic throb that reminded him he was 38 and very much made of breakable parts. But he had refused to stay in the medbay for another hour. He was wearing a grease-stained flight suit instead of his consultant's blazer. He looked like a grunt who had just finished a double shift on a colony world, which was exactly how he felt. "Sitrep looks green, Voss," a voice called out. He turned to see Ambassador Holloway walking toward him. She had swapped her diplomatic silks for a practical jumpsuit. Behind her, a team of human engineers and Astrati technicians were working together on a shattered sensor array. It was a sight Kaylin hadn't seen in his 16 weeks on the station. Two species actually talking to each other instead of performing for each other. The Solstice is finishing the last of the deep tissue scans for the lower-tier workers, Holloway continued, leaning against the crate beside him. The brass back home is in a state of shock. They expected a bill for a funeral. Instead, they got a bill for 3,000 liters of synthetic blood and a request for a permanent trade embassy. The brass always hates a surprise, Kalen muttered, taking a sip of the lukewarm coffee in his hand. It wasn't the bitter Astrati swill. It was real, roasted beans from the Solstice's galley. It tasted like salvation. They wanted me to be a statue. Statues are easy to budget for. Heroes are expensive and usually have bad attitudes. Is that what you are now? A hero? Holloway's eyes twinkled with a bit of the old diplomatic mischief. I'm the guy who didn't bug out, Kalen said, his voice dropping an octave. That's all. I spent 10 years being the guy who did exactly what he was told, and I couldn't live with the silence anymore. This time, I just made some noise. The right kind of noise, she corrected him. By the way, Malakor's trial starts in 48 hours. The High Council wanted to do it behind closed doors. Astrati pride, you know. But Zoraya shut that down. She wants it broadcast to every colony in the sector. She says the age of secrets is KIA. Kalen nodded, his gaze drifting to the two Astrati guards standing near the transit tube. They were the ones he had freed from the neural collars. They weren't puppets anymore. One of them, a young man named Thallo, whose skin was a steady, grateful silver, noticed Kalen looking and offered a crisp military salute. Kalen didn't just nod back this time. He stood up, ignored the wince of pain from his side, and returned the salute. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a mountain moving. You're changing, Voss, Holloway said quietly. You're actually present. I haven't seen you this unghosted since before New Hope. New Hope was a dirt nap for my soul, Ambassador, Kalen said, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the gas giant below. I thought if I didn't participate, I couldn't fail. But watching Malachor stand on that throne, I realized that the people who stay quiet during a crisis are just as responsible for the fire as the guys holding the torches. I'm done being an observer. Good, she said, patting his shoulder, because the Exarch is looking for you, and she doesn't look like she's in the mood for a statue. Kalen watched her walk away, his mind processing the events of the last few days. He thought about the 5 conspirators now sitting in the brig, and the hundreds of Astrati who had come forward to report anomalies they had ignored for years. The culture of the Zenith Spire was shifting. The pride was still there, but it was being tempered by the realization that they were vulnerable, and that vulnerability was where the real strength of an alliance lived. He walked over to the viewport, resting his hand on the cool crystal. 2 light years away, Earth was a tiny, pale dot. For 10 years, he had felt like he was drifting in the void between worlds, belonging to neither, hiding from both. But as he watched a human engineer laugh at a joke made by an Astrati technician, a joke that probably involved some very specific cultural slang, Kalen realized that he didn't want to hide anymore. He had spent 16 weeks being mocked for his silence, and he had used that mockery as armor. But armor is heavy, and eventually, if you want to be able to touch anything, you have to take it off. Master Voss, a familiar, resonant voice echoed behind him. He didn't have to turn to know it was Zoraya. Her resonance was different now, stronger, more grounded, like the deep hum of the station's core. I hear the humans have a saying, she said, stepping up to the viewport beside him. Her skin was a beautiful, shimmering gold, untouched by the gray of doubt. Something about the calm after the storm? We do, Kalen said, though usually the storm leaves a hell of a mess to clean up. The mess is the best part, Zoraya replied, her eyes tracking the movement of a repair drone. It shows that something actually happened. It shows that we are no longer stagnant. For 150 years, I thought I was the guardian of a perfect world. I was just the curator of a very expensive museum. Museums are quiet, Kalen noted. Quiet is easy. Real life is loud. Then let us be loud, Kalen, she said, her hand brushing against his sleeve. The High Council has finished the hot wash of the security protocols. They want to implement your recommendations for the sensor gaps. All of them. Even the ones that require sharing data with the human fleet? Especially those, she said. We've decided that having secrets from our friends is a luxury we can no longer afford. Malachor fed on our isolation. He turned our silence into a weapon. We won't give him that chance again. Kalen looked at her, seeing not the arrogant exarch who had mocked him, but the leader who had bled beside him in a maintenance shaft. It's going to be a lot of heavy lifting, Z. Your people aren't going to love the idea of human grunts crawling through their sacred conduits. Then we will teach them, she said firmly. And you will lead the way. I've told the council that your new title isn't consultant. It's Warden of the Nexus. You'll be the bridge between our forces. Warden of the Nexus, Kalen repeated the words, testing the weight of them. Sounds like a lot of meetings. I might have to actually talk. I think you've proven you're capable of that, Zoraya said with a smile that reached her violet eyes. And I promise, the coffee in the council sessions will be much better from now on. I've personally requisitioned 50 kilos of the human beings. 50 kilos, Kalen chuckled. That's a good start. But we're going to need more than that if we're going to rebuild a whole alliance. They stood together in the light of the gas giant, two survivors of a war that had been fought in the shadows and won in the light. The Zenith Spire was still broken, but for the first time in its history, the music of the station was being written by everyone who lived inside it. Kalen felt the rhythmic pulse of the station beneath his boots. It was no longer the sound of a countdown to a trap. It was the heartbeat of a world that had decided to wake up. And as he watched the stars, Kalen Voss realized that he was finally, truly awake with it. The formal investiture ceremony was held 30 days after the fall of High Warden Malachor. It was an event that would be remembered for 3 centuries as the Day of the Open Window. The Zenith Spire's grand ballroom was packed, but the atmosphere was fundamentally different from the Festival of Luminescence. There were no gilded cages. There were no silent statues. Kalen Voss stood on the central dais, his back straight, his shoulders square. He was wearing the formal uniform of the Sol Convergence, a midnight blue jacket with silver trim, but he had refused to wear the medals. I don't need pieces of tin to remember what happened, he had told Halloway. To his right stood Exarch Zoraya, radiant in robes of pure, shimmering white. To his left, Ambassador Halloway and the 2 guards, Thalo and Vara, whom he had saved from the neural collars. The audience was a sea of humans and Astrati, their skins a chaotic, beautiful tapestry of colors. Zoraya stepped forward, her voice amplified not by a mechanical system, but by the natural resonance of the room she had finally learned to master. For many years, we believed that our greatness was measured by our distance from the rest of the galaxy, she began, her violet eyes scanning the crowd. We believed that to be Astrati was to be silent, untouchable, and perfect. We were wrong. Perfection is a lie told by those who are afraid of the dark. She turned to Kalen, her skin flaring a brilliant, celebratory gold. We mocked a man who came to us with an open mind and a quiet heart. We called him useless because he chose to listen instead of shout. But when the darkness came from within our own house, it was this silent statue who stood in the gap. It was this useless human who showed us that courage is not found in the words we speak, but in the truth we are willing to die for. She reached out and took Kalen's hand, lifting it for all to see. I present to you Kalen Voss, Warden of the Nexus. He is no longer a consultant. He is our brother. He is the voice of the Zenith. The room erupted. It wasn't the polite, rhythmic clapping of the old Astrati court. It was a roar, a messy, human-like cacophony of cheers, stomping feet, and the melodic, high-pitched singing of the Astrati. Kalen stepped to the microphone. He looked at the thousands of faces, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the urge to disappear. He didn't feel the shadow of Maya or the fire of new hope as a burden. He felt them as a foundation. I spent a long time thinking that silence was safety, Kalen said, his voice steady and clear, echoing through the chamber. I thought that if I didn't say anything, I couldn't be wrong. I thought that if I didn't care, I couldn't be hurt. But I was wrong. Silence isn't safety. It's just a place where the monsters grow. Courage isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the one who speaks when it's hardest to be heard. It's about choosing to participate in the world, even when the world is broken. He looked at Zoraya, then back at the crowd. We have a lot of work to do. We have to rebuild the sensors, the trust, and the alliance. It's going to be loud, it's going to be messy, and we're probably going to argue a lot. But we're going to do it together, and that's the only victory that matters. The ceremony transitioned into a celebration that lasted for 24 hours. Kalen spent most of it talking. He talked to engineers about power couplings. He talked to ambassadors about trade tariffs. and he talked to the young guards about the best way to clean a kinetic sidearm. He was no longer the furniture. He was the pulse. Late that night, after the crowds had thinned and the music had softened, Kalen found himself back at the observation deck. He was looking at a small holographic locket he had pulled from his vest, the image of Maya in the garden. "She would have liked this place," a voice said. Zoraya was standing beside him, her skin a soft, sleepy blue. "The colors. She would have loved the way the gas giant turns the light into a rainbow." "Yeah," Kalen said, his thumb tracing the edge of the hologram. "She loved bright things. She used to say that the stars were just lanterns the universe left on so we wouldn't be afraid of the dark." "She was wise," Zoraya said softly. "Are you still afraid of the dark, Kalen?" Kalen looked at the locket, then at the vast, sprawling void beyond the crystal. He felt the weight of his side, the itch of his bandages, and the exhaustion in his bones. But he also felt the warmth of the station, the hum of the people sleeping in the tiers below, and the solid, unwavering presence of the woman beside him. "No," he said, and he realized he meant it. "I think I'm done being afraid. The dark is just space where the light hasn't reached yet. We just have to be the ones who carry the lanterns." He closed the locket and tucked it away. He looked at Zoraya, seeing the future not as a series of risks to be assessed, but as a journey to be taken. He had finally moved from the corner of the room to the center of his own life. "I look back at the man who stepped off that shuttle 20 weeks ago, and I barely recognize the ghost in the suit. For 10 years, I walked through the world like a man underwater, watching the ripples but never feeling the chill. I thought I was being a professional. I thought I was being a survivor. I told myself that after New Hope, my only job was to stay quiet and stay alive. I didn't realize that by cutting myself off from the noise of the world, I was effectively KIA, while my heart was still beating. I spent 16 weeks letting an alien queen mock my silence, thinking I was the one with the upper hand because I was observing. I thought I was the smart one for knowing the secrets and keeping them tucked away. But the secrets didn't save anyone. It was the moment I stopped being a consultant and started being a human, with all the mess, the fear, and the loud, bloody truth that comes with it, that actually made a difference. I learned that you can't save a world if you aren't willing to be a part of it. You can't assess a risk if you aren't willing to take one yourself. I'm no longer the silent observer. I'm a man who speaks, a man who acts, and a man who is finally, after a decade of winter, feeling the sun on his face again. It turns out that being useless furniture was the most expensive lie I ever told myself. I spent a decade convinced that if I just kept my mouth shut and my head down, the ghosts of my past couldn't find me. I believed that my silence was a shield, only to realize it was actually a wall keeping me away from everything that made life worth living. I wonder, is there a silence you've been keeping in your own life because you're afraid of the noise the truth might make? What would happen if you finally decided to let the furniture speak? Kalen Voss walked toward the transit tube, his footsteps firm and audible against the crystalline floor. He didn't look back at the shadows. He walked straight into the morning light of a new world, his voice already rising to meet the dawn.